Good afternoon. Thank you everybody for joining us for our 2023 Emergency Solutions Grants Orientation webinar. Today we're going to be going over information about your 2023 ESG grant with TDHCA Homeless Program staff. I'm Abigail Versip. I'm the Director of Single Family and Homeless Programs, and I wish to congratulate each of you on your award of ESG for the upcoming fiscal year. And with that, we'll begin the webinar. So joining us today on the webinar is myself, Abigail Versip, Rosie Falcone, who is our Homeless Programs Manager, Timur Chattery, he's our Homeless Programs Specialist. We're also joined by our ESG Cares staff, Natalie Bertzos, our ESG Cares Administrator, and Alexa Johnson, our ESG Cares Program Specialist.
Thank you, Abby. First, I want to express my congratulations on your 2023 ESG Annual Award, and thank you for your continual hard work and dedication. We could not be as successful as we are without the tremendous work your teams perform. To support you in your implementation of the ESG program, today's webinar will introduce you to the rules governing our program. Tomorrow we'll go over a few housekeeping items for today's webinar before we begin.
If you have questions during the webinar, please enter them in the question panel of GoToWebinar. Questions will be answered after the presentation and responses posted online with the webinar recording. If you have any specific questions about your ESG funds, please submit your question through the email address listed on this slide. That email inbox is checked by more than one staff member. During today's webinar, we will provide a brief overview of TDHCA and highlight several components of the ESG program. We will also lay out some resources and additional webinars for you to review.
Thank you, Timur. We'll begin with an overview of the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, which we refer to as TDHCA or the department throughout this webinar. TDHCA is responsible for affordable housing, community and energy assistance programs, and regulation of the state's manufactured housing industry. TDHCA serves as a pass-through entity for all grant funding, and as such is responsible for program administration and oversight. We currently administer about $2 billion through for-profit, nonprofit, and local government partnerships in delivering assistance to Texans in need. Additionally, the department administers several one-time programs to address the COVID-19 pandemic. Timur will take us through an overview of the programs that we administer.
Thank you, Rosie. So TDHCA has a number of different program types. Our poverty and homelessness prevention programs include the Single Family and Homeless Programs Division, which houses the ESG program, the Homeless Housing and Services Program, HHSP, as well as the Ending Homelessness Fund. Other TDHCA programs include the Rental Assistance Program, Rental Housing Development, Energy Efficiency, Home Repair, Single Family Home Ownership, and Home Buyer Assistance. ESG providers may find it helpful to connect with other providers, such as rental assistance providers or rental housing, that was developed with help from TDHCA. You can learn more about other providers by accessing TDHCA's Help for Texans page.
The department maintains a public database of our subrecipients on our Help for Texans page. This tool is accessed both by community members looking for assistance and by our Housing Resource Center staff when people contact TDHCA. Each provider has their own page that includes their location, contact information, and the TDHCA funded services they provide. Subrecipients can use the Help for Texans page to see what organizations in your area may have TDHCA funding if you need to make a referral. You can find all ESG funded subrecipients under the Homeless Services section, and if you notice any updates that need to be made, please send them to our general inbox.
Thank you, Alexa, for that helpful guidance. As ESG recipients, you will be working with two divisions of the department. Members of the Single Family and Homeless Program staff are responsible for contracting and performance. Although you may hear from our director, Abigail Versip, or myself, most of the communication regarding your performance will be handled by Timur Shaduri. For ESG Cares contracts and questions, Natalie Bertzos and Alexa Johnson are your main points of contact. It is important to be familiar with the staff distinction, as ESG Annual and ESG Cares have different requirements that affect eligibility of funds. If you are unsure who to contact, you can email our general inbox and your request can be routed to the correct person. And we've listed that address on your slide. Members of the Compliance Division are responsible for compliance with rules and regulations and are led by Ernest Hunt, Director of Compliance, and Manuel Peña, Manager of Physical Inspections. A listing of the compliance staff can be found by accessing the link noted on the slide. Tomorrow we'll dive a bit further into the roles of each division.
On this slide, y'all will be able to see a general overview of the division of duties between the program area as well as the compliance division. In general, the Single Family and Homeless Programs Division takes the applications, sets up the contract, reviews reporting, and provides technical assistance, while the compliance staff follows up on how well the contract and regulations were being followed.
Before I start with the lengthy requirements that follow, I want to bring your attention to an important change. October 1st started the transition between the FAC transferring from the U.S. Census Bureau to the U.S. General Services Administration, or the GSA. This means that any single audit that needs to be uploaded on or after October 1st must be sent through the new GSA host site. For your convenience, we have added a link to the welcome page of the new FAC on our slide. Although the Homeless Programs team does not handle single audit compliance, it is important to us that you are aware of these deadlines, as it is a direct impact on your ability to access ESG funds. At the time our performance specialists review your draws, they must verify your organization is not delinquent in any submission. If a delinquency exists, they will be unable to process your payment until it is resolved. The single audit is an organization-wide audit of an entity expending $750,000 or more in federal or state funds. An organization may have both a federal and a state single audit. However, it is more likely that most of you will only need a federal single audit. The deadline for completion is dependent on each entity's fiscal year end and not individual grant years. It is due the earlier of 30 days after receipt of the auditor's report or 9 months after the end of its respective fiscal year. This requirement is the same for both federal and state single audits. The submission process for a single audit depends on the type of audit. For federal single audits must be submitted to the FAC. Notice of the submission must be sent within 5 business days to the single audit email noted on the slide. To expedite the processing, it is recommended, though not required, to send a PDF copy of the single audit and a copy of the FAC acceptance email along with your notice. This is important because we will not be able to process your draw once again until or enter into a new contract until compliance is updated your submission date. For a state single audit, you must submit a PDF copy of your single audit to the single audit email in order to be in compliance. The audit certification form is a department requirement that is used as a certification of expenditures for each fiscal year, and it is due within 2 months after each fiscal year. It will be submitted to the single audit email inbox as well. You can access the ACF by going to the compliance forms webpage, which we've linked on our slide, and ensure you enable macros in order for the form to work properly. If you have any questions or need help completing the form, please reach out to the Compliance Division by emailing the Single Audit contact email.
Next, we will have a brief overview of what ESG is, documentation, contract periods, as well as the closeout process. The Emergency Solutions Grants Program is a competitive grant that awards funds to private nonprofit organizations, cities, and/or counties in the state of Texas to provide the services necessary to help persons that are at risk of homelessness or homeless quickly regain stability with permanent housing. The 2023 ESG annual allocation is $9.37 million. Despite its relatively small size, ESG supports one of our most important areas, assisting persons who are homeless or who are facing homelessness. The ESG Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or ESG CARES, provided TDHCA with a one-time allocation to prepare for, prevent, and respond to COVID-19. The department has received over $100 million through 3 separate phases for this endeavor. Many of you have also helped us tremendously in quickly utilizing these funds to help the most vulnerable. There are several differences between ESG Annual and ESG CARES. For those that manage simultaneously active annual and CARES contracts, please ensure that you are seeking out the requirements for each of the programs and that you are tracking them accordingly. We will highlight some more of the differences later in the webinar. So the ESG program provides funding to engage homeless individuals and families living on the street, improve the number and quality of emergency shelters for homeless individuals and families, help operate these shelters, provide essential services to shelter residents, rapidly rehouse homeless individuals and families, and prevent families and individuals from becoming homeless. These eligible activities fall under 6 ESG components that subrecipients can be funded for. These are street outreach, emergency shelter, homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing, homeless management information system, or HMIS, and administration. You can learn a lot more about these components in Title 24 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 576, or the Title 10, Chapter 7.32 of the Texas Administrative Code.
This slide is one you would want to come back to for reference, as it lists the federal and state regulations that govern ESG. Many of these regulations are also linked in our administration and reporting webpage of the TDHCA website. Programmatic requirements are noted in the Code of Federal Regulations, Parts 576, 91, 582, 583, and Chapter 7 of the Texas Administrative Code and your ESG contract. Administrative and financial requirements are noted in Part 200 of the Code of Federal Regulations and Chapters 1 and 2 of the Texas Administrative Code. Your ESG contract will also have some administrative requirements noted.
ESG generally serves clients who are experiencing homelessness or are at risk of homelessness. People experiencing homelessness may be eligible for rapid rehousing, emergency shelter, and street outreach. People at risk of experiencing homelessness may be eligible under homelessness prevention. Those who are being evaluated for homelessness prevention eligibility must also have annual incomes within 30% of the area median family income. The ESG program uses 2 definitions for eligibility across these program components: the homeless definition and the at-risk of homelessness definition. Our video library has some webinars that cover each definition, its eligibility criteria, and its record-keeping requirements. Each definition also has handouts with some basic information that can be found through these links on this slide at the HUD Exchange. Next, we'll go through a closer look at 2 definitions as they relate to homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing participant eligibility. On this slide, this table reflects a summary of the categories under both the at-risk of homelessness definition and the homelessness definition. Homelessness prevention eligibility includes all three at risk of homelessness definition categories, as well as categories 2, 3, and 4 of the homeless definition. For rapid rehousing, eligible participants must meet the requirements of the homeless definition category 1, literally homeless, or category 4, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. While both components do have eligibility criteria under both category 4 of the homeless definition, there are different restrictions for each component. For category 4 under rapid rehousing, eligibility is also restricted to those residing in emergency shelter or living in another place described in category 1 of the homeless definition. It is important for new subrecipients or staff to review the client eligibility and documentation requirements for the components they are awarded for.
There are several forms and documents required at both the program level and the client level. In your program level documentation, you should have the items listed on the slide as well as applicable to your program. We will not go into detail of these documents or forms, so please reference the ESG documentation webinar, which is located in our video library on our website. This webinar covers a majority of required documentation and forms, but note that not all required documents for running an ESG-funded program are covered in the webinar. Please ensure that you reference your contract, the Code of Federal Regulations, and/or the Texas Administrative Code to ensure proper compliance. Next, your client-level documentation is extensive, and we have listed the forms you must have in your files as applicable to your participant file. Once again, we will not be going through each of these forms today, but the ESG documentation webinar goes through the basics of each. It is important to note that although the certification of zero income, income certification, and income screening tool are not required forms, you must still have a system in place that adequately documents income determination.
The time period for your 2023 ESG annual contract is November 1st, 2023 through October 31st, 2024, unless a different contract term was requested at the time of your contracting. If you have a 2022 ESG annual contract with an extension, you may have an overlapping time period. You should complete the 2022 ESG contract first. The same prioritization is applicable if you have any reallocated ESG annual funds. For example, if you have a 2023 ESG contract that includes rapid rehousing, you still have rapid rehousing funding in a reallocated contract or an extension on a contract, prioritize your ESG annual with the older funds first.
For 2023 subrecipients with an active 2022 contract, it is important to know that for performance reports, program participants that are assisted continuously as the contract ends and the new contract begins in the same program will count as new program participants for the new contract. Please be sure to report each program participant only once per contract. However, the start of a new contract does not require new eligibility determination or documentation for program participants, except as required by federal rule for ESG. Also, for subrecipients that have current contracts, there is one measure on reporting that is for maintaining housing for 3+ months. Program participants served with rapid rehousing or homelessness prevention funds who exit within the last 3 months of a 2022 contract are not able to be reported in terms of maintaining housing for 3+ months in a 2023 contract. They may be reported as maintaining housing for 3+ months in the 2022 ESG annual contract with the appropriate follow-up.
Most of you have a current 2022 ESG annual contract, so it is important to note a few dates related to your ESG contract closeout. First, any budget or contract amendments must be submitted 30 days before the contract end date. Second, all reporting must be submitted within 45 days of the end of the contract period. Please note there's no cumulative report. Just submit your final report and mark the final draw box on your MPR. It's important to remember that any performance and expenditures not submitted by December 15, 2023 may not be eligible for reimbursement and consideration in your performance outcomes, which may impact your next ESG application score. For each contract that your organization has with the department, an inventory report must be submitted within the closeout period of each contract. The inventory report must include any item with a useful life of a year or more, or has a per unit value of $5,000 or more. The inventory report must be turned in annually until the equipment is either sold or it has reached its useful life, or its value is under $5,000. But please ensure proper disposition guidelines are followed. The inventory form is located on our website, and we've noted a link on the slide.
Thank you, Rosie. Next, we will look at the housing contract system, monthly reporting, as well as SAGE reporting. So the housing contract system, HCS, is divided into two levels, the contract level and the activity level. The contract level has documents pertinent to the administration of the contract, such as the contract, any amendments, written standards, the HCS access request form, or a direct deposit authorization form. The activity level includes all monthly reporting, which includes monthly performance reports, expenditure reports, and reimbursement requests. The grant's contract contact and contract executor will have access to HCS, and other subrecipient staff members may also have HCS access for reporting purposes. The executor is contacted when there is a contract level event, such as a reallocation of funds or an amendment. The contract contact, however, has a much more active role in communicating with TDHCA staff. Each grant only has one, so please ensure that this is an individual who is responsive to any emails and can delegate work to the correct staff members should assistance be needed in reporting other matters related to the contract. Please note that the contract executor can be designated as the contract contact. However, these are truly two separate roles, and it is highly recommended that they are performed by two different staff members to prevent any delays. If a subrecipient decides to keep the executor and contract contact the same, we highly encourage them to forward any correspondence to a responsible staff member as well. Finally, designating the contract contact, as well as granting access to additional staff, is done by filling out an HCS access request form on our website and emailing the completed form, including the executor's signature, to the main ESG inbox. Lastly, please remember that whenever the executor or contract contact changes, an updated HCS access request form is needed. Next, we'll go over monthly reporting. So with the acceptance of ESG funds, you agreed to enter data into HMIS or a comparable database for those operating as domestic violence or legal service providers. This data is then used to assist providers with filling out monthly reporting to TDHCA. Subrecipients must submit monthly draws that consist of the monthly performance report, MPR, and a monthly expenditure report. These draws will be submitted to the housing contract system no later than the last day of each month and reflects performance and expenditures conducted in the prior month.
Thank you, Timur. For all ESG annual contracts, there is a minimum match requirement of 100%. However, if during the competition for funds you elected to provide 110% match, that becomes your organization's minimum requirement. You can view your requirement in your 2023 ESG contract. Our homeless program performance specialist will be emailing quarterly updates on the status of your contract requirements. However, ensuring you meet the match requirement rests on the organization. Timing will be based on the calendar year, so the first update should be expected by the end of March. Reporting match in excess of 110%, although allowable and up to each organization's discretion, I would like to point out that there's no additional benefit to your organization during competition. Once you have reported match for ESG, those funds cannot be used as match for any other grants. Expenditures that are reported as match must be eligible activities with the ESG program, and all ESG program rules will apply. This means if you have a source of funds that are more flexible than ESG, once you use them as match, you would no longer have the flexibilities of the original grant. Match must be reported with your monthly expenditures in the non-program fund credit column of your monthly expenditure report. Depending on the type of match source you're using, the frequency of reporting will vary. However, ideally, you should be reporting match monthly if you're using sources like other grants that pay for salary, office space expenses, etc. If you're using in-kind donations or cash donations that may come sporadically, then we can see a bi-monthly or quarterly reporting of match. There are several useful resources for when you're collecting and reporting data. At the federal level, HUD has issued guidance on HMIS and data in the HMIS data standards. In the ESG program, HMIS manual, as well as in several ESG FAQs and in 24 CFR Part 576. Resources from the department can be found on the ESG guidance webpage and include the monthly reporting guide and sample monthly report, as well as 10 TAC 7.2, which covers definitions, 7.5 covering subrecipient reporting, and 7.6 covering subrecipient data collection.
We will not be going into the specifics of the monthly performance report, but I do want to bring your attention to the monthly reporting guide. The guide is available on the ESG Administration and Reporting Guidance page and goes over housing contract system access, report submission, and specifics of what is needed in the reports, including what exactly is to be reported for each of the data fields in the monthly performance report. When working on your ESG annual contract, please ensure that you are referring and utilizing the ESG annual allocation reporting resources and not the ESG CARES resources. In addition to monthly reporting, subrecipients must submit information requested by the department for annual reporting. The annual reporting may extend over multiple contracts. ESG subrecipients will submit information yearly as required for the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report, or CAPER, including SAGE reporting using HMIS exports. This is not to be confused with ESG CARES contracts, where SAGE reporting is required quarterly, but is compiled by HMIS leads for all subrecipients with the exception of victim service providers. SAGE reporting is required annually for ESG annual contracts and is typically done around September of each year. Now we will pass it over to our ESG CARES team to go over some of the differences between ESG annual and ESG CARES, as some of you may have both types of contracts.
First important distinction between ESG annual and ESG CARES pertains to income determination under homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing. For homelessness prevention, one difference is that ESG annual, the area median family income percentile is 30% AMFI at both initial client evaluation and reevaluation. Another difference is that ESG annual's reevaluation timeline is a shorter cycle occurring every 3 months. For rapid rehousing, while ESG annual doesn't require income determination upon initial evaluation, it does require reevaluation at the 12-month mark with 30% AMFI as the client income cap for annual. Please note that if you previously only had an ESG CARES contract, you must ensure that the written standards you submit for your ESG annual contract are updated to reflect annual requirements and not CARES requirements. The second difference between ESG Annual and ESG Cares is unit eligibility requirements for tenant-based rental assistance, or TBRA. For ESG Annual, in addition to fair market rent limits being required, rent reasonableness requirements also always apply. Please be sure that you have a rent reasonableness process and are carrying out determinations. Another difference is minimum standards for permanent housing, sometimes also referred to as habitability standards. Minimum habitability standards must be met by eligible units under ESG Annual, and other unit standards like HQS cannot be used in its place. For this reason, please ensure that your ESG Annual written standards includes minimum habitability only. Finally, ESG Annual budget amendments are restricted by the component awarded and does not allow for moving funds from one program participant service to another, such as moving funds from shelter to street outreach. However, you are able to move funds between budget line items within a single component, like moving funds from Rapid Rehousing Financial to Rapid Rehousing Services. Lastly, budget and contract amendments for ESG Annual have a more strict timeline and should be submitted no less than 30 days before the contract end.
Thank you, Alexa. In our final section, we will briefly look at ESG webinars and resources that may be helpful to you.
Thank you, Tamar. Well, this orientation webinar does not go into detail on all of the requirements to successfully run an ESG Annual program. It gives the framework necessary to guide you through the resources. We have noted the various webinars that will aid in the implementation of your individual ESG programs. It is encouraged that new and existing subrecipients review these webinars for a more comprehensive understanding of the ESG program. If there are any questions after you have reviewed these webinars, please do not hesitate to contact us.
Also, please make sure to take a look at the department's websites. We provide a lot of guidance on our website, and Natalie will take us through where to find some of these resources.
Thank you. So hopefully now you can see the department's main ESG program page. At TDHCA's website, you can always navigate to homeless programs from the main menu under this drop-down, under homeless programs, and then solutions grants where it has ESG in parentheses. On the left side of the page, we have some navigation tools. We have a link to NOFAs, but most importantly, we have these pages that we reference throughout our webinar, including the administration and reporting page, program guidance page, and then below, under resources, we have the ESG video library. These are 3 places where you'll want to bookmark, and I'll briefly go through each of them. Under administration, as mentioned before, we have the regulations as well as forms that subrecipients may need to submit to us at different points in time, such as a budget amendment form, direct deposit updates, and the housing contract system access request form. And below, you'll find those reporting resources that were mentioned earlier. Next, on our program guidance page, there are also links to regulations, but there are some forms that TDHCA either provides or requires for client and unit eligibility. There are also some other forms of guidance towards the end of the page, as well as some of the income limits and other information needed for client and unit eligibility. Lastly, and most importantly, our ESG video library. If you are new or have staff that are new to the ESG Annual program, going through some of our past webinars, both the recordings and or the handouts with the slides is a great place to start. And all of the trainings that were mentioned throughout this presentation, you will be able to find here. So client documentation, some program level documentation, income training, and also the recording later for this presentation as well. Sorry, there we go.
We want to thank you today for your participation in the webinar and for all of the work you do to help the most vulnerable. This wraps up the 2023 ESG orientation. If anyone has any questions, we can take them now, or you can email questions to our program email. Please remember that program-specific questions we may not be able to address today. Please send those to our inbox. But if you have any general questions, please send them in now. Natalie, do we have anything?
We have a couple questions. One question that we have is regarding the appropriate follow-up, which was noted on a slide about how to report outcomes for housing 3+ months towards the end of a contract, I believe. So if a subrecipient needs to report those positive housing outcomes, how should they reach out or make that reporting happen?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so follow-up is required at least minimum once a month, right? Once every 30 days. And so for, and Natalie, if somebody already covered this while I was trying to reconnect, please let me know. You would need, in their case notes, you would need to be able to show that you have been in contact the minimum amount of times and tracking that in order to be able to report a client or a participant that is being helped out of 2 contract periods that are one that is ending and one that is restarting.
Rosie, would they also need to submit another supplemental report to the program specialist?
No, they would not need to submit another supplemental report.
Thank you. Let's see. Another question that we got was regarding the client eligibility slide, which I will also try to navigate back to. The question was, could somebody who is facing eviction be eligible for rapid rehousing? And this was on slide 17, I believe. So while this table does not reflect the full definitions, somebody who would qualify for rapid rehousing should usually come from coordinated entry and must meet the literal homeless definition, otherwise known as Category 1 of the homeless definition. So they would not qualify, because I know that that is not one of the definitions within that. However, that client or applicant may be eligible either under the at-risk of homeless definition 1 or the homeless definition category 2 if they meet other requirements such as income.
Right. And that's a great question because that is a big distinction in rapid rehousing between the COC program and our program.
Some other folks have asked, will this webinar be on the list to be accessed later? And how can people return to some of these materials later on?
Yes, it will be posted on our website in our video library, and I believe we have attached it as a handout. Am I correct in that, Natalie or Tamor?
Yeah, it's been attached as a handout, and it was sent out to everyone who registered for the webinar, and it will also be available on the ESG section of our website.
You should expect it to be up early next week. We do have to do a couple of things before we can post it on there, but it will be on our TDHCA YouTube channel, and the link is going to be on our website. And I believe Natalie has the slide of how to get to our video library.
At this time, I believe that's all the questions that we have received. As a
Go ahead, Natalie.
I was going to say, as a reminder, if you have questions or you have questions specific to your organization that you would prefer to contact, you can email us. And I'll turn it back over to you, Rosie.
If you do have a question come up as you are viewing this webinar or any of our other webinars, and you're unsure who to email, always reach out to the ESG inbox, and one of us will be able to either answer it or route it to the correct person. As you go through our current webinars, if you could also give us a little bit of feedback in terms of the usefulness or questions that you could have as you're reviewing the pre-recorded webinars, that can also be sent to the ESG inbox. That will help us improve our webinars going forward for our 2023 grant. Okay, Natalie, have we answered all the questions then?
We have.
Okay. Okay, well, as we've mentioned, please reach out to us if something else comes as you are going through the webinar materials. Take a chance to download it now if you did not get it in the email, and then look for this along with the slides to be posted early next week on our website. Everybody should have their 2023 contracts active and ready to go. So as you are exploring the housing contract system, let us know if you have any questions so that we can help you before your next reporting. For those of you that might be new with us, just a couple of deadline reminders since we have a couple of minutes. Do be aware that your reporting has to go through a review process. So once you submit your draw, it could take 7 to 10 business days for our program staff to review and approve, and then up to an additional 2 weeks for our accounting division to process the payment fully. So just keep that in mind as you are submitting your draws so that you have enough time and enough, your funds are given to you when you need them. Seeing no other questions, we will end this today. Thank you so much for joining us today.